Are you considering buying a property but unsure where to start? What does the process actually look like, and what questions should you be asking yourself? Well, that's actually what we're going to talk about in today's video as I guide you through the process of deciding that you want to become a homeowner to actually walking through the front door of your dream home. Now, with that, I want you to understand we're not going to go into detail on each one of these pieces in order to keep the video somewhat concise, but it is going to give you a really good idea of where to start and what that process looks like once you decide you're ready to own a home. Now, typically in my experience, what happens is most people decide they want to become a homeowner and then they start looking at properties on Zillow, on Redfin, on Realtor.com. They even start going to open houses and getting emotionally attached to properties. And that is absolutely the wrong way to start the process. And the primary reason for that, because it can come with a lot of heartache if you end up not being able to qualify for the home that you actually wanted to buy. So instead of being reactive, rather than finding the property first and then finding out if you can qualify, the goal is to be proactive and to come into it financially prepared, knowing that you're actually pre-approved to buy a home. But before we dive into the pre-approval process, which is where you should start, there is one step prior to that, which is exactly what I'm going to dive into right after you hit that thumbs up if you find any value in my content at all. And if you want to stay updated on content like this, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. So when watching a lot of real estate videos, most people will tell you the very first step to becoming a homeowner is getting pre-approved. And yes, that is true, but it's not the whole truth, if you will. The very first step prior to that pre-approval process is looking at a budget, for one, and figuring out how much home you think you can actually afford. And what I mean by doing a budget, I mean taking your salary. If you're a single individual, take just your salary. If you have a spouse or a partner and they're going to be helping you with that mortgage, then you're combining all of your income. In some cases, it might be multiple friends buying a property. Well, in that case, you should come up with a budget between everyone by looking at how much income you're bringing in versus what are your monthly expenses. And I'm not talking about just the stuff that shows up on your credit report, like your car payments, your credit card, your installment loans, that sort of thing. I'm talking about everything. How much you're spending on groceries, how much you spend going out, how much you spend on childcare, all of those different things to figure out how much disposable income you have right now, because that's going to come in handy once you start that pre-approval process. Now, one other thing I want you to consider before going through the pre-approval process is by looking at your credit score, by looking at how much money you have in the bank. Are you comfortable? Are you in a position where if you lost your job and now you're a homeowner, are you comfortable continuing to make that payment? Do you have some money in the bank outside of what it's going to cost for the down payment, outside of what it's going to cost for the closing cost on that loan? Are you comfortable with your financial position? Because if you're not, then there's no reason to go out and take on additional debt or try to become a homeowner just because you're tired of renting. Renting isn't bad. Renting is buying you patience until you're ready to buy a home. So you shouldn't step into the shoes of becoming a homeowner until you make sure you have all of these other pieces of the puzzle together. But let's assume that you've done that, you've done your budget, you know exactly how much you can afford to purchase, what you're comfortable spending per month, you've got money in the bank, and you're ultimately comfortable with the idea of becoming a homeowner. Well, this is where you're going to step into that process of pre-approval. And the reason we say start with the pre-approval process first is because it's really the foundation for buying a home. During the pre-approval process, the mortgage professional that you decide to work with is going to look at your credit scores. They're going to look at your assets. They're going to look at your income. They're going to look at the full financial picture of your avatar, of you, if you will, and determine exactly how much home you can qualify for based on your debt versus your income. And that's exactly how a lender determines how much you can qualify for. Now understand, I didn't say they're going to determine how much you can afford, because a lender can't determine how much you can afford. They don't know how much you spend on all of these other ancillary things that we mentioned earlier in the video. Childcare, date nights, your shopping on Amazon, all of that stuff. That's for you to figure out in your budget. Rather, the lender is going to determine how much you can qualify for based off how much income you make versus how much debt shows up on your credit report. Things like your credit cards, student loans, car payments, all of that stuff. All of the other items don't report there. So don't rely on your lender to tell you how much you can afford to purchase. Rather, start with determining how much you're comfortable spending per month. And then in an ideal world, the lender says, hey, you can actually qualify for the amount that you're looking to spend, which is honestly the best case scenario. The last thing you really want to have happen is go and start looking at houses, fall in love with something, be ready to make an offer, and then go back to the pre-approval process, talk to a lender, and they say, hey, listen, you can't actually qualify for that much house. You're at this price point versus that price point, because in that case, it's an automatic letdown. And because buying a home is an emotional process to start, that only adds to the emotion of the process. And typically speaking, if you had been looking at more expensive homes than you could actually qualify to start, it's not only going to be a letdown that you can't qualify for that home, but it's going to be a letdown when you start looking at homes that are less in price, because typically speaking, that means it's going to come with less home and likely less upgrades in many scenarios. So that's why it's super, super important to start with the budget, follow it with the pre-approval process just to make sure you're in the best position possible so that when you do find the right home, you know you're in a position to move forward and write an offer. Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about early in the video is how do you find that mortgage professional? Or do you start with a real estate agent first? Is it the chicken or the egg? And I don't think it really matters which one you start with, because if you called me, for example, to start the process, you hadn't been pre-approved, one of the very first things I'm going to do as a real estate professional is I'm going to tell you, hey, we need you to go through the pre-approval process because we need to determine how much home you can actually qualify to purchase. Because I can't start showing you property, sending you property, setting you up on different searches if we don't know how much home you can actually afford. So I'm going to refer you to someone that I trust to guide you through that process. Now, if you're watching this and you don't know where to start, there's a referral link in the description below where you can actually work with our team to get pre-approved, and then you'll work with me so that I can help you find the right home. But maybe you start with the mortgage professional first and you go through that pre-approval process. That's okay too. And oftentimes I have people reaching out to me say, hey, Jeb, I'm ready to buy a house. And I say, have you been pre-approved? They say, yes, I've already gone through the process. That is the ideal client to want to work with because they've already done the hard work of the pre-approval. Now we get to do the fun stuff of actually looking at property, finding out what is important to you in a home and trying to narrow it down to the perfect property. And you might be watching this going, okay, well, how do I find that real estate agent? Well, if you're local here in Orange County, I would love the opportunity. My team and I would love the opportunity to help you, but maybe you're outside of the area. Well, good news. I actually network with real estate professionals like myself, not only here in California, but all over the United States. I network with people just like me that do business exactly like I do. So if you need a referral to an agent anywhere in the United States, that same referral link that I mentioned earlier will get you in touch with me so that I can get you in touch with them. And that really is step 3 and step 4 of the process. So we talked about budget, we talked about pre-approval, we talked about the mortgage professional, we talked a little bit about the real estate professional. Now, I've done other videos where I've talked about the characteristics that you should look for in your real estate agent. So I'm not going to do that here, but I'll link to a video right here where I talk about what you should be looking for in your real estate professional when you're deciding on who to work with. But let's assume you've already got the pre-approval done, you found your agent, you're ready to start looking at homes. Well, that's when you're going to have that conversation with your real estate professional about what it is you're looking for in a property. Oftentimes, I'll do a home buyer questionnaire to a client to say, hey, listen, this gives you some basic questions that I want you to answer that gives me a really good idea for what you're looking for in a home. In some cases, I actually had a client reach out to me recently that had created a PowerPoint presentation and sent it to me. And I'll be completely honest, it was very, very effective because I knew exactly what they wanted when I got to the end of that presentation. But nevertheless, you should have an idea of what it is you want in a home. A real estate agent like myself shouldn't be telling you what you want in a home. A lot like we said, you should create a budget early on before talking to a mortgage professional. Well, as a potential home buyer, you should go through your list, if you will, of non-negotiables before ever speaking to a real estate agent. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about where you want to be location-wise. If you know how many bedrooms you need, how many bathrooms you want, what would be ideal for you in a property. Now, some of these things you might compromise on. Other things you might not compromise on. In fact, you should have things that you will not compromise on when deciding on buying a home. Sometimes it's the community. Sometimes it's the school district. Other times it might be, I have to have this in a property, otherwise I'm not buying it. But what I will tell you is one thing that should always be a non-negotiable is location, because you can't pick a home up and move it. Everything else in a property you can change. You can change cosmetic upgrades, you can change the floor plan, the layout of a property, you can change the design, you can change all of that stuff, but you can never change the location. Now, you might be watching this going, Jeb, I have a couple of different locations that I would consider. That's okay. But when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I just want to live in Orange County. Orange County is a very big space. And depending on where you decide to buy in Orange County and where you work, that can be a very long distance. So I want you to come in with some ideas of where you want to be and not compromise on those unless something changes from our initial conversation. But once you have that list, that's going to set us up for the ideal home search, how I guide you through the process. Now, a lot of home buyers out there are already looking at websites like Zillow and Redfin, and it's a very good idea to do that. In fact, you should be going to open houses and seeing property once you've been pre-approved, as long as you're looking at properties in the right price point. But in addition to that, you need to have a real estate agent on your side looking at properties on your behalf as well, talking to agents in their network, talking to agents potentially in their office, trying to find off-market opportunities, because oftentimes that can lead to success in finding the right property by finding it in another place other than the multiple listing service. Now, the problem with the home shopping process is sometimes this can take a day, a week to find the right property. Other times it can take months, maybe even a year in some cases to find the right property. Not to say you're going through the process through a year straight, but sometimes people go for a couple of months and then they take some time off because of summer break, kids on vacation, and then they decide to come back into it. And now it's a couple more months searching for the right property. And depending on where supply and demand is at that time, it can be more difficult or maybe even in some cases a little bit easier to find the right property. So it's never too early to start the process. Just because you get pre-approved and you find the right property doesn't mean you have to purchase it. But you would rather be in that situation than find the perfect property and not have done all the legwork that you need to do to buy it and then be out of luck because the market is moving too fast or because there's multiple offers during that process. So the sooner you decide to become a homeowner and actually do the basic steps that we're talking about here, the better off you're going to be long term. But once you find that property, you're going to go through the process of writing an offer on that property, which is going to go through the process of filling out a residential purchase agreement, deciding on how much you're going to offer, the deposit, your contingencies, all of these different things in a property. Now, you might be watching this going, Jeb, I have no idea about any of that. Where do I start? Well, actually, we'll throw another link here about what you can do to make your offer more competitive. We go through the offer process, if you will, to put yourself in the best position possible to get your offer accepted. Now, ideally, your first offer gets accepted, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to write multiple offers before an offer gets accepted. So don't just think it's you if you write one offer and your offer doesn't get accepted that, hey, my agent sucks or you did something wrong. No, that's completely normal. Most people don't get their first offer accepted when buying a property, especially in a competitive market. So in some cases, that process can take a little bit of time. And that's why I tell you to start sooner than later. I often have people reach out and say, hey, my lease isn't ending for another 4 months or 5 months. I'm going to start a month before or 2 months before. And I say, hey, start now, and we can always negotiate a longer term escrow. We can negotiate things if we find the right property. Maybe you don't find the right property and it takes you a couple of months to find the right property. It's better to do that than be up against a time crunch and have to extend your lease or move out of a property and find some sort of short-term rental while you're trying to find the right home. So the earlier you decide and start looking, the better off you're going to be. But once you get that offer accepted, you're going to be working with your real estate agent, with your mortgage professional to get additional documentation. You're going to go through the inspection process. You're going to have an appraisal order. There's a bunch of things that happen during that process, like your home inspection, all of that you're going to do as part of your due diligence in order to buy that home. Now, hopefully all of that goes well. I'm not going to dive into all of that here because it is a lengthy process. But with that, the majority of that is actually taken care of by your real estate agent and your mortgage professional. There's not really a lot that you have to do once your offer actually gets accepted. But once it gets accepted, you go through this entire process, and assuming all goes well, you end up closing on that property, which is the goal. That's the goal from the start, is to actually get to the finish line, not just make an offer and have it fall out and have to start over. No, it's all about getting to that finish line, which is essentially when you close on that property. From there, you're going to move into the property. You're going to have to move, get utilities, do everything that would normally happen post-purchase. But for the most part, that gives you a really good idea of what that process looks like. Now, if you've gotten this far and you've decided, I'm ready to start this process, well, again, I would love the opportunity to help guide you. If I can be of any assistance to you at all, you can actually reach me using that referral link in the description below. Now, one other thing I want to point out, if you're looking for the best way to position yourself to buy a home in 2024, do me a favor and check out this video here.